Hello, and welcome to the Whodunitville TV review of the Murder, She Wrote episode, Nailed. The first episode of Season 12, the series' last season. Now, I know that many of you are asking yourselves, why is he reviewing an episode from the last season of a series? Shouldn't he be reviewing an episode from the first season to entice us to view the whole series? Well, yes. Normally that is the approach I would take, but since Murder, She Wrote is such a beloved show and so iconic, if you're even remotely interested in murder mysteries, which I assume is why you clicked the thumbnail, you probably already know a great deal about the show. I chose to review the first episode of the last season so I could discuss the lesser-known behind-the-scenes problems surrounding the last season. Just in case you don't know, Murder, She Wrote was an American mystery TV series created by Peter S. Fisher, Richard Levinson, and William Link. Levinson and Link also shared a creator credit for the character Lieutenant Columbo. Murder, She Wrote starred Angela Lansbury and aired on the CBS network. The program ran for 12 seasons from September 30th, 1984 to May 19th, 1996, for a total of 264 episodes. The series was a ratings hit for most of its broadcasts, becoming a staple of the CBS Sunday night schedule, averaging 25 million viewers per week at its prime. However, as the series rolled on, Lansbury began to express weariness over her role on the show, as she was not sure whether or not her age was becoming a factor with the ever-increasing pace now required of her to perform, noting specifically the change from 7 to 8 days to shoot each episode. The problem was ultimately solved with the introduction of guest sleuth episodes, where another actor would take up the bulk of the investigation for the show, leaving Lansbury only to appear in cameos or even just to introduce the episode premise at the start. When the episode Nailed premiered on September 21st, 1995, Murder, She Wrote was the 8th most watched program on TV, tied with NBC's new sitcom Friends, which aired on Thursday. Murder, She Wrote was such a powerhouse for CBS on Sundays that executives decided to move the show to Thursdays to go head-to-head with Friends, a show that was dominating CBS's previous Thursday night lineup. Fans of Murder, She Wrote protested the move because they knew their beloved mystery couldn't compete and that the subsequent drop in ratings could mean cancellation. And that's ultimately what happened. So if the loyal fans of Murder, She Wrote knew what the move from Sundays to Thursdays might ultimately mean, so too must the entire production have surmised. The question then becomes, did the quality of the show in its suspected last season dip at all? Let's find out. This episode aired on September 21st, 1995, and was directed by Anthony Pullen Shaw. The first thing we see in this episode is a man who later we'll discover is the uptown burglar, or Metropole Cafe terrace waiter, Billy Blake, sliding down a rope alongside a building at night. This burglary has gone awry, however, as the owner of the apartment Billy just robbed came home early and he was forced to stab her with her own kitchen knife. The next day, we see a very busy New York hair salon called Antoinette's on 5th, and Jessica Fletcher getting a fresh coif from Antoinette's star hairdresser, Jimmy Neiman, right before he rushes off to do a TV interview with talk show host Nancy Rayburn. Enter NYPD Lieutenant Sam Crilly, who seems very out of place in this upscale New York hair salon. Apparently, he's there to get from Jessica a guest list of the party where the robbery/stabbing victim attended the night before for the local museum board members. This was an odd scene for me. It implies that Jessica Fletcher has previously met Lieutenant Crilly, which would be okay, but why is an NYPD lieutenant meeting Mrs. Fletcher at her hair salon for a list he could have gotten from the museum? Actually, the whole relationship between Mrs. Fletcher and Lieutenant Crilly seems a bit off to me, but more on that later. At the salon, we also meet fellow museum board member Kathy Stafford, receptionist Phoebe Campbell, Steve Burke, a new author Jessica has taken under her wing and who is working at the salon to gather background for his first book, Diane, the manicurist who is engaged to superstar Jimmy, and Antoinette herself, the owner of the salon, who is terrified that Jimmy is going to leave her salon. And she's right to be worried, because the next time we see Jimmy, he's meeting Ralph Stafford right after Jimmy's interview with Nancy Rayburn. Ralph Stafford is the husband to museum board member Kathy Stafford, and he is your prototypical slimy businessman type. He's played by John O'Hurley, who is probably best known as Elaine's boss on Seinfeld. Stafford and Jimmy argue as Stafford pressures Jimmy to sign his contract and leave Antoinette's, warning Jimmy not to disappoint all the investors Stafford has lined up already for Jimmy's Hair Works, a new franchise of salons. How slimy is Ralph Stafford? Well, after convincing his wife Kathy to put up her priceless 1804 silver coin as collateral for a loan to launch Jimmy's Hair Works, he has a copy of the coin made and gives the copy to his mistress, Nancy Rayburn, along with a promise to divorce Kathy, all in order to secure a $400,000 loan from Nancy Rayburn. With check in hand and goodbye kiss from Nancy, Ralph leaves her apartment, but not before being seen by his wife, Kathy. Meanwhile, Mrs. Fletcher has worked out that the burglar, Billy, must have some way of knowing when his victims are not going to be at home. She also notices that all the previous victims were clients of Antoinette's hair salon. So voila, the penny finally drops, and the two realize how simple would it be for someone at the salon to listen to all of the patrons gabbing on and on about their social commitments, like, say, a museum board party, where they would be away from their apartment for hours. Then that someone could tell Billy the burglar when it was safe to go in. That someone could also grab the victim's keys when they weren't looking and make wax impressions of them to copy to make Billy's job even easier. All of this is exactly what happened when Nancy Rayburn went to the salon and Billy the burglar stole the coin that Nancy Rayburn thought was real. Billy also knocked out Steve, who unfortunately was there to return Nancy's glasses she left at the salon. So Steve will be blamed for the burglary and put behind bars by an over-officious cop ready to pin all the burglaries on him, right? Wrong. Even though he works at the suspicious salon and was caught at the scene of the crime, Lieutenant Sam barely shows any reluctance at all in letting Steve go just based on Mrs. Fletcher's word. Throughout this episode, the relationship between the lieutenant and Mrs. Fletcher bothered me. His willingness to accept the amateur Mrs. Fletcher's help might even suggest that these two were on a case together before. It's been a while since I watched these episodes, so if these two characters were working together before, please forgive me. But let's say they hadn't been on a case before. I can understand not wanting to use the trope of the reluctant cop's attitude towards an amateur butting in. However, some tropes, especially in long-running series, can become beloved landmarks that the audience actually wants to see, and purposefully excluding them can be jarring. I personally prefer it when Mrs. Fletcher goes to another city, investigates a murder, and there's the stereotypical cop who humors Jessica, but ultimately is very condescending towards her crime-solving abilities. This gives the audience something to cheer for when the overbearing cop is proven completely wrong and must apologize. It's also much more believable. Sure, it's a trope, but it's a part of the show. Without it, it feels like if Columbo goes an entire episode without ever saying just one more thing, or if Poirot never gets that moment when he corrects someone for calling him French. As the story proceeds, we see Billy the burglar meet up with Ralph Stafford. Billy knows now that the coin he stole is fake, and having been working at the cafe where Ralph and his wife Kathy met to give the coin up for collateral, and having overheard the real coin's priceless value, Billy now tries to blackmail Ralph. This doesn't work, though, as now Ralph knows that Billy is the burglar and threatens to turn him into the police. Finally, we arrive at the big farewell party for Jimmy as he leaves Antoinette's, and everyone is there. At some point, Ralph gets a sloppily written note, supposedly from Jimmy, asking Ralph to meet him at the salon. Ralph runs off, and a little later we see Jimmy skulking into the salon and discovering the dead body of Ralph with a pair of scissors sticking out of his back. So who did it? Was it Jimmy because he wanted out of his shady deal with Ralph? Was it Antoinette because she wanted to keep Jimmy at her salon? Was it Ralph's wife, Kathy, because she saw him cheating on her? Or was it Billy to keep Ralph from telling the police that he was the burglar? It's clear to see that this episode didn't meet the standard of quality as in previous seasons. For me, the script seemed disjointed. The robbery for me was an unnecessary piece that seemed to be only there to add another suspect to the case. And the salon murder mystery could have been better, i.e. less complicated, without it. The acting was very good overall, despite the pacing of the episode being too slow. I'll give this episode of Murder, She Wrote Nailed 2 out of 5. But what do you think? Tell us in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button or even subscribe so that you'll be notified when we put out more videos like this. Thanks again, and remember, the world is a mysterious place, especially in Whodunitville.